3 signatures were all it took to erase 7 years of marriage. Standing in the rain outside the mansion she had designed, renovated, and turned into a home, Lavinia realized she wasn't just losing a husband, she was being erased. Derek didn't just want a divorce, he wanted total destruction. He had drained their joint accounts at First Republic, changed the locks to the penthouse, and served her papers claiming she was nothing but a leech on his hard-earned empire. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. But Derek made one fatal calculation. He forgot that before she was his wife, Lavinia was someone else, entirely. And she was about to remind him that you never, ever declare war on a woman who knows where the bodies are buried. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse overlooking Central Park. Inside, the air was colder than the storm brewing over Manhattan. The only sound was the scratching of a Mont Blanc pen against crisp legal paper. Derek sat behind his mahogany desk, a piece of furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and didn't even look up as Lavinia entered the room. He just slid the blue folder across the polished surface. It stopped inches from her hand. "Sign it," Derek said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He took a sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly, a sound that would haunt Lavinia for years. Lavinia stared at the folder. She was still wearing her coat, damp from the drizzle outside. She had rushed home because Derek had sent a text saying it was an emergency. She had feared a medical crisis, perhaps an accident involving his parents. Instead, she found a stack of documents titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. "Derek," her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "What is this?" "It's over, Lavinia," he said, finally looking at her. His eyes, once the warm hazel she had fallen in love with, were now hard, calculating flint. "I've been unhappy for a long time. You've become stagnant, boring. I need a partner who matches my ambition, not a housewife who spends her days arranging flowers and spending my money." Lavinia felt the blood drain from her face. "Stagnant? I manage the household. I organized the charity gala for your firm last month, the one that landed you the Kensington account. You spent my money to throw a party," Derek corrected her, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "And let's be clear about the assets. The prenup you signed 7 years ago. It's ironclad. You get a small stipend for 6 months and that's it. The apartment is mine. The Hamptons house is mine. The portfolio at Goldman is mine." Lavinia reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. The room was spinning. "You're throwing me out? Tonight?" "Tonight," Derek confirmed. He checked his Rolex, a gift she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. "Actually, my security team is waiting in the lobby. You have 20 minutes to pack personal essentials. Anything bought with my credit card stays." "Derek, please," she begged, the shock giving way to a searing panic. "We can go to counseling. We can talk about this. You can't just erase 7 years because you're bored." The office door opened, and the sharp click of stiletto heels echoed on the hardwood. Lavinia turned to see a woman she recognized instantly. Sophie, Derek's executive assistant for the last 2 years. She was younger, sharper, and currently wearing a diamond necklace Lavinia had seen on a bank statement weeks ago but never received. "The car is waiting, Derek," Sophie said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy as she glanced at Lavinia. "Oh, poor thing. Does she need help packing?" The realization hit Lavinia like a physical blow. It wasn't just boredom. It was her. "You're leaving me for your secretary?" Lavinia asked, her voice hardening slightly. Derek laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Sophie is more than a secretary. She's a visionary. She understands the business world. She helped me close the Meridian deal while you were busy picking out curtains. She's the future. You're the past." He walked around the desk and stood next to Sophie, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. "Don't make a scene, Lavinia. It will only embarrass you. Arthur Penhaligon drew up these papers. You know his reputation. If you fight this, he will bury you in legal fees until you're living in a shelter. Just sign, take your stipend, and disappear." Lavinia looked at the two of them. The arrogance was suffocating. Derek truly believed he was the architect of his own fortune. He believed the narrative he told his investors, that he was a self-made genius. He had conveniently forgotten the late nights she spent editing his pitch decks, the introductions she made to old friends she claimed were just acquaintances, and the subtle steering she did to keep him from making catastrophic investments. He thought she was just Lavinia, the quiet orphan he married out of college. She reached out and picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. "You want me to disappear?" Lavinia asked, her eyes locking onto his. "You want to keep everything?" "Everything that matters," Derek sneered. Lavinia signed the papers. She didn't read them. She didn't argue. She signed her name with a flourish, capped the pen, and set it down. "Done," she said. Derek blinked, surprised by her sudden compliance. He had expected tears, screaming, perhaps a broken vase. "Good. Sensible. I'll get my bag," Lavinia said. She turned and walked out of the office, past the woman who was stealing her life, and headed to the master bedroom. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't pack jewelry. She walked into the walk-in closet, reached to the very back of the top shelf, and pulled down a dusty, nondescript shoebox. Inside was a single burner phone and a black leather ledger. She put the phone in her pocket and tucked the ledger into her coat. 20 minutes later, she walked out of the building. The doorman, a kind man named Henry, who had always liked her, looked at her with sad eyes. "Mrs. Hawthorne." "Do you need a cab?" "No, Henry," Lavinia said, pulling her coat tighter against the rain. "And it's not Mrs. Hawthorne anymore. It's Ms. Taylor." She walked 2 blocks until she was out of sight of the penthouse balcony. She stepped into the shelter of a bus stop, pulled out the burner phone, and dialed a number that hadn't been active in 7 years. It rang once, twice. "Status?" a gravelly voice answered. "No hello, no pleasantries." "The asset is compromised," Lavinia said into the phone. "Protocol 0. Initiate the clawback." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. "It's about time, Lavinia. We were wondering when you'd get tired of playing house. Welcome back." The first week was a brutal lesson in the hierarchy of Manhattan society. Derek hadn't just divorced her, he had blacklisted her. Lavinia checked into a modest motel in Queens, using cash she had squirreled away over the years for household emergencies. She needed to lay low. She needed Derek to think she was destitute, broken, and scrambling. She sat on the lumpy mattress, her laptop open, watching the news. Tech mogul. Derek Hawthorne announces record profits for Hawthorne Dynamics, the news anchor announced. The screen showed Derek, smiling broadly, holding Sophie's hand at a gala. Hawthorne credits his streamlined focus and new strategic partnerships for the 40% stock surge. In other news, Hawthorne's high-profile divorce seems to be proceeding quietly. Lavinia watched Derek's face. He looked invincible. He was currently courting investors for his new venture, Project Ether, a massive AI infrastructure deal that required billions in capital. He needed the backing of the Vanguard Trust, an elusive European investment group that rarely did business in the US. "Enjoy the spotlight, Derek," she whispered, taking a bite of a cold sandwich. "The higher you climb, the harder the fall." Her phone buzzed. It was the lawyer, Arthur Penhaligon. "Lavinia," Arthur's voice was patronizing, "we noticed you haven't cashed your stipend check yet. Derek is concerned you might be unstable. He wants to ensure you have the means to relocate, perhaps to the Midwest. The cost of living is much lower there." "I'm fine, Arthur," Lavinia said, keeping her voice meek. "I'm just trying to figure out my next steps. It's hard." "Well, don't take too long," Arthur snapped. "Derek is looking to sell the Hamptons estate to liquidate some assets for a new investment. We need you to sign a quitclaim deed on the property. Technically, your name is still on the original title from when his parents bought it, purely a clerical error, but we need it cleared." Lavinia smiled. The Hamptons' house, the one place Derek truly loved. He thought the title issue was a clerical error. "I'll sign whatever you need, Arthur. Just send it over." "Excellent. You're being very reasonable, Lavinia. It makes things easier." She hung up. Reasonable. That was the word they used for women who did what they were told. She opened a secure browser on her laptop and logged into a portal that didn't exist on Google. It required a two-factor authentication key she kept memorized. The screen turned black, then populated with lines of green code. User, LV access level, director, target, Hawthorne Dynamics. Lavinia wasn't just a housewife. Before she met Derek, she was Lavinia Taylor, the estranged granddaughter of Sebastian Taylor, one of the original silent partners of the Global Sovereign Bank. She had walked away from the family fortune to find real love, to be loved for herself, and not her billions. She had hidden her identity, created a background as a scholarship student from Ohio, and married Derek, hoping he was a good man. She had protected Derek from her family's wolves. She had used her anonymous influence to smooth the road for his company, anonymously tipping off investors to his potential. Derek thought he was a genius. In reality, he was a beneficiary of Lavinia's invisible hand. Now, she was going to take the hand away. She typed a command into the terminal. Query: who holds the majority debt for Hawthorne Dynamics? The system processed for a moment. Result: 60% of debt held by shell company Blue Heron LLC. Lavinia typed again. Query: who owns Blue Heron LLC? Result: the Taylor estate. Lavinia sat back. Derek had borrowed heavily to fund his lifestyle and his new girlfriend's demands. He had borrowed from a lender he thought was a faceless corporate entity. He didn't know he was borrowing from his wife's trust fund. "Okay, grandfather," she muttered. "Let's call in the loan." But she couldn't do it yet. If she destroyed him now, it would look like bitterness. She needed him to commit a crime. She needed him to be so desperate that he crossed a legal line, ensuring he couldn't bounce back. She needed to get back into his circle. The next day, Lavinia went to a thrift store. She bought a sharp, vintage blazer and a pair of oversized sunglasses. She dyed her hair from its soft, honey blonde to a severe, dark brunette. She looked sharper, older, more dangerous. She took a cab to the financial district. She had a meeting with the one person Derek feared more than losing money, Elias Thorne. No, wait, she couldn't use that name. She had a meeting with Mr. Sterling. No, she had a meeting with Mr. Halloway, the head of the Securities and Exchange Board's Compliance Division. He was an old friend of her father's. She walked into the towering glass building, bypassing security, with a badge she had pulled from her old life. She took the elevator to the 40th floor. Halloway was waiting. He looked up, surprised. "Lavinia, my God, it's been 10 years. We thought you were domesticated." "I was," Lavinia said, sitting down without being asked. "But the lease on that life expired." "What do you need?" Halloway asked. He knew better than to ask small talk. "Derek Hawthorne is about to court the Vanguard Trust for Project Ether," Lavinia said. "I know for a fact he is inflating his user numbers to secure the valuation. He's cooking the books, James. I can't prove it yet. But I know where he hides the real ledger. And where is that? It's not digital, Lavinia said. He's paranoid. He keeps a physical black book. It used to be in the apartment. But when he kicked me out, he moved it. If you can get me that book, Holloway said, leaning forward, we can freeze his assets within the hour. I can't get inside, Lavinia admitted. He has new security. Sophie is watching him like a hawk. Then you need a Trojan horse, Holloway said. Someone on the inside. Lavinia smiled. I don't need someone new. I need someone he already ignores. She stood up. I need you to freeze his personal accounts for 24 hours. Just a compliance check. Make him panic. When Derek panics, he makes mistakes. And when he makes mistakes, he runs to his safe zones. Consider it done, Holloway said. But Lavinia, if this goes south, I can't protect you. Derek has powerful friends. Derek thinks he has friends, Lavinia corrected. He has people who want his money. Once the money is gone, he'll be just another man in a suit. She walked out of the office. The game had begun. Derek had fired the first shot, but Lavinia was bringing the heavy artillery. Derek Hawthorne was having a magnificent Tuesday. He had just ordered a $2,000 bottle of wine for lunch with Sophie at Le Bernardin. They were celebrating the tentative agreement with Vanguard. To us, Sophie purred, clinking her glass against his. And to getting rid of the dead weight. To the future, Derek grinned. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. You should get that, darling, Sophie said, annoyed. Derek frowned and picked up the phone. It was his personal banker, a Chase private client. This better be good. I'm at lunch. Mr. Hawthorne. The banker sounded breathless, terrified. I don't know how to tell you this. Your personal accounts, they've been frozen. Frozen? Derek laughed. What are you talking about? I have 10 million liquid in that account. It's a federal hold, sir. A compliance check regarding irregular transfers to the Cayman Islands. Derek went cold. He had made transfers to the Caymans to hide assets from the divorce settlement. But he had been careful. Fix it, Derek hissed. I don't care who you have to bribe. Fix it. He hung up, his appetite gone. What is it? Sophie asked. Nothing. A banking error. But his hand was shaking. If they froze his personal cash, he couldn't pay the deposit for the Vanguard meeting venue. He couldn't pay the consulting fees, bribes, to the regulators. He needed cash. Fast. Sophie, he said abruptly, I need to stop by the office. There's a document I need to retrieve. Now? Yes, now, he snapped. He didn't go to the office. He directed the driver to a storage facility in Chelsea. Iron Mountain Storage. Lavinia was watching from a parked sedan across the street. She saw the limo pull up. She saw Derek get out, looking frantic. Gotcha, she whispered. She picked up her burner phone. Grandfather, he's at the storage unit. He's going for the reserves. We are tracking, the voice said. Do you want us to intercept? No, Lavinia said. Let him feel safe. Let him take the box. I want him to bring the evidence right to the Vanguard meeting. I want to destroy him in front of the very people he's trying to impress. Derek emerged 10 minutes later, carrying a metal briefcase. He looked relieved. He jumped back into the limo. Lavinia started her engine. She followed him. The next day was the Vanguard presentation. It was being held at the Plaza Hotel. Every major investor in New York would be there. Lavinia parked her car a block away. She checked her reflection. She wasn't Lavinia the wife anymore. She wasn't Lavinia the victim. She pulled out an invitation card. It was embossed with gold leaf. Guest, Miss L. Taylor. CAO, Blue Heron LLC. She stepped out of the car. The rain had stopped. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day for an execution. The grand ballroom at the plaza smelled of expensive lilies, aged mahogany, and the subtle, metallic scent of desperation. Derek stood at the podium, the massive LED screen behind him, displaying soaring graphs and complex algorithms for Project Ether. He was sweating through his Italian silk shirt. The frozen accounts were a noose tightening around his neck, but the metal briefcase sat beneath the podium, a comforting weight near his feet. Inside were raw diamonds and bearer bonds, his escape chute if the walls truly closed in. But they wouldn't. He was Derek Hawthorne. He could talk his way out of anything. In the front row sat Henri Dubois and Clara von Hess, the representatives from the Vanguard Trust. They were impassive, European titans of finance who held the keys to the billion-dollar injection Derek needed to cover his massive debts before anyone noticed they existed. Sophie sat nearby, looking radiant in a gown that cost more than Lavinia's car. She gave him a subtle thumbs up. Project Ether is not just an AI platform, Derek boomed, finding his rhythm. It is the central nervous system for the next century of global finance. We are projecting a 300% ROI within 24 months based on our current market share. He was lying. His current market share was hemorrhaging clients due to service neglect while he chased this white whale. But if Vanguard bought in, the lie would become truth. The infrastructure is sound, the capital is secure. All we need is the partnership to ignite the fuse. Derek smiled his most charming smile at Clara von Hess. We are ready to change the world. A heavy silence fell over the room as he concluded. Henri Dubois leaned toward the microphone on his table. Mr. Hawthorne, Dubois said, his accent thick and aristocratic. The projections are impressive, but Vanguard is risk-averse. We have concerns regarding the liquidity of Hawthorne Dynamics. There are rumors of significant outstanding debt. Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. Rumors, Monsieur Dubois. Competitors trying to undercut our momentum. Our debt-to-equity ratio is perfectly healthy. Is it? The voice came from the back of the ballroom. It was a woman's voice. Clear, authoritative, and chillingly familiar. Every head turned. Standing at the double doors was a woman who looked like a vision of corporate vengeance. She wore a tailored obsidian suit that looked like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. She walked down the center aisle, the sound of her heels like a metronome counting down Derek's remaining time on Earth. Derek squinted against the stage lights. He knew the walk. He knew the cadence of her voice. But the package was completely wrong. Who is that? Sophie hissed from the front row. The woman didn't stop until she reached the table where the Vanguard representative sat. She didn't look at Derek. She looked directly at Henri Dubois and extended a manicured hand. Monsieur Dubois, Madame von Hess. My apologies for the interruption. I am Ms. Taylor. Derek felt the blood drain from his extremities. Taylor. It was Lavinia's maiden name, the name she had abandoned years ago because she said her family was toxic. The name of a mid-level accountant from Ohio, she had told him. Ms. Taylor? Dubois looked confused but intrigued by her commanding presence. Do we know you? You know my company, Lavinia said smoothly, her voice projected to the entire silent room. I am the CEO of Blue Heron LLC. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Blue Heron was the mysterious entity that held 60% of Hawthorne Dynamics' operating debt. Derek gripped the podium. Lavinia, what are you doing here? Security! Lavinia finally turned to him. She took off her oversized sunglasses. The eyes were the same, but the warmth was gone, replaced by an abyssal coldness. "Lavinia?" Sophie screeched, standing up. "What is this drab little housewife doing crashing a billion-dollar meeting? Get her out of here." "Sit down, Sophie," Lavinia said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The authority in her voice made Sophie drop back into her chair as if struck. Lavinia turned back to the Vanguard reps. "I am here because Mr. Hawthorne is attempting to defraud your firm. He just stated his debt ratio is healthy. As the holder of $60 million of that debt, which is currently 90 days delinquent, I am here to correct the record." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Dubois looked at Derek, his expression darkening instantly. "Delinquent?" Dubois asked. "Mr. Hawthorne, explain yourself." "She's lying," Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "She's my bitter ex-wife. She's trying to sabotage me because I left her. She doesn't own Blue Heron. She's a nobody." Lavinia pulled a thin leather folio from under her arm. She placed 3 documents on the table in front of Dubois. "My articles of incorporation, proving my ownership of Blue Heron, the loan agreement signed by Derek Hawthorne, using assets he didn't fully own as collateral, and today's notice of default, calling in the entirety of the loan, effective immediately." She looked up at Derek, a faint, cruel smile touching her lips. "You're insolvent, Derek. You were insolvent the moment I decided to stop propping you up." The silence in the Plaza ballroom was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation dying in real time. Henri Dubois reviewed the documents with terrifying speed. He passed them to Clara von Hess, who adjusted her glasses and scanned them. She looked up at Derek with undisguised disgust. "Mr. Hawthorne," Clara said, her voice like ice, "these documents appear authentic. You are attempting to secure a billion-dollar investment while facing an immediate $60 million capital call you cannot meet. This is undeniably fraud." "It's a misunderstanding." Derek left the podium, approaching their table, hands held out in supplication. "Lavinia, Ms. Taylor, she's manipulating the data. I have reserves. I have capital." "Do you mean the contents of the briefcase under the podium?" Lavinia asked quietly. Derek froze mid-step. Lavinia turned to the side of the room where James Halloway of the SEB had just quietly entered, flanked by 2 federal agents. "Agent Halloway," Lavinia said, "I believe Mr. Hawthorne is currently in possession of unregistered bearer bonds and conflict diamonds intended to facilitate flight from federal jurisdiction, purchased with funds siphoned from his company accounts to avoid divorce proceedings." Derek looked at the briefcase. He looked at Halloway. He looked at Lavinia. You followed me," he whispered. "I've been following you for 7 years, Derek," Lavinia said. "I cleaned up your messes. I hid your incompetence. I made you look like a king when you were just a jester in a borrowed crown. And when you decided I was disposable, you forgot the most important rule of business. Know who your real investors are." Halloway stepped forward. "Derek Hawthorne, I have a warrant for your arrest regarding securities fraud and embezzlement. Please step away from the briefcase." The reality crashed down on Derek. The handcuffs felt cold and tight. But the worst part wasn't the arrest. It was the look on Sophie's face. She wasn't looking at him with concern. She was looking at him with the calculation of a rat assessing a sinking ship. As the agents led Derek past the front row, he looked at Sophie, pleading with his eyes. "Sophie, call Arthur. Get the bail money. We can fix this." Sophie stood up, smoothing her expensive dress. She looked at Lavinia, then back at Derek. The sneer she usually reserved for waiters was now directed at him. "Bail money?" Sophie laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You heard the lady, Derek. You're insolvent, you're broke, and frankly the fraud thing. It's so tacky." She turned to Lavinia. "I didn't know, obviously." I was a victim of his lies just as much as anyone else. Lavinia looked at the younger woman. She saw the ambition, the hollowness. She saw herself 10 years ago, albeit with less moral grounding. "Save it, Sophie," Lavinia said dismissively. "By the way, the diamond necklace you're wearing? Derek charged it to the company card last month. The feds will be reporting it as evidence of embezzlement before you leave the building. I'd take it off now to avoid a scene in the lobby." Sophie's hands flew to her throat. Her face turned puce. She glared at Derek with pure hatred. "You worthless bastard," she hissed at him. "You said you owned everything." "He did," Lavinia said, as the agents dragged Derek toward the exit doors. "He owned the lie, but the rent just came due." Derek was shoved out the side doors of the ballroom, the flashbulbs of the business press, who had been tipped off by an anonymous source, blinding him. He was finished. Lavinia remained in the ballroom. Dubois stood and bowed slightly to her. "Miss Taylor," Dubois said, "it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude. You saved Vanguard from a catastrophic error." "Vanguard has always been a friend to the Taylor family," Lavinia said smoothly, slipping back into the role she was born to play. "My grandfather sends his regards." Dubois' eyes widened slightly. "Sebastian Taylor is your grandfather?" "He is." "Mon Dieu," Dubois breathed. The Taylor family didn't just have money. They were the bedrock upon which money was built. They were old, quiet, and terrifyingly powerful, and Derek Hawthorne had tried to treat their heiress like a discarded napkin. "Perhaps," Dubois said, trying to regain his footing, "Blue Heron and Vanguard could discuss future opportunities. A partnership, perhaps?" "Perhaps," Lavinia said, non-committally. She put her sunglasses back on. "Call my office on Monday. Right now, I have a divorce to finalize." 3 days later, Derek was out on bail. His parents had put up their retirement home in Florida to secure the bond. He was currently staying in the Hamptons house, the only place he felt safe, though the silence of the massive oceanfront estate was deafening. His lawyer, Arthur Penhaligon, was no longer patronizing. He sounded terrified on the phone. "The feds have everything, Derek. The ledger in the briefcase was a roadmap to 5 years of tax evasion and investor fraud. They're talking 10 to 15 years in federal prison." "I don't care about prison right now, Arthur," Derek shouted into his phone, pacing the travertine patio overlooking the Atlantic. "I need money to fight this. Sell the apartment, sell the cars, and get the paperwork ready for this house. I have a buyer lined up in Dubai who will pay cash, fast close." "Derek, about the apartment," Arthur stammered. "Sophie changed the locks. She claims tenancy. It's going to take months to evict her, and the feds have a lien on it anyway." Derek threw a Scotch glass against the patio wall, shattering it. "Then the house. The Hamptons house is worth $25 million. Sell it today." I can't, Derek." "Why the hell not? I own it. My parents bought this place in the 90s. "We ran the title search again, Derek, to clear that clerical error you mentioned." Arthur paused, and Derek could hear the man swallowing hard on the other end of the line. "Derek, your parents never owned this house." Derek stopped pacing. The ocean breeze suddenly felt freezing. "What are you talking about? I grew up here every summer." "They had a 99-year leasehold agreement," Arthur explained, his voice shaking. "It's a very old, very arcane arrangement, usually reserved for European aristocracy. They paid a nominal fee for the right to occupy, but the underlying land and the structure, they never belonged to the Hawthorns." "Who owns it?" Derek whispered, looking around the sprawling estate that he thought was his birthright. The infinity pool, the guest house, the private beach access. "The underlying deed is held by a private land trust," Arthur said. "The Sovereign Coast Trust." A black SUV pulled into the long, crushed gravel driveway. Derek watched it approach. He knew who was inside before the door even opened. "Let me guess," Derek said into the phone, his voice dead. "Let me guess who manages the Sovereign Coast Trust." Lavinia stepped out of the SUV. She wasn't wearing the power suit from the plaza, nor the meek cardigans she used to wear as his wife. She was wearing white linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, looking effortlessly elegant and completely at home. Because she was. She walked up the patio steps. She didn't look angry, she just looked indifferent. "You need to leave," Lavinia said calmly. "This is my house," Derek tried, but the fight was gone from his voice. "No, Derek. This was my grandfather's summer cottage," Lavinia corrected him, surveying the horizon. "When your parents wanted to buy it back in the 90s, my family's estate managers recognized their name. They knew your father was a gambler and a bad credit risk. So, they offered him a leasehold that looked like ownership to the untrained eye. It was a kindness, really, to let them pretend they had made it." Derek slumped into a patio chair. His entire life, his legacy, his inheritance, it was all smoke and mirrors. "And the prenup?" Derek asked, his eyes stinging with tears of humiliation. "The one you signed that gave you nothing?" Lavinia almost laughed. "Oh, Derek, you never even had Arthur read it properly, did you? You just handed him the template your dad used for his second wife." She leaned against the railing. "That prenup was written by my family's lawyers years before I met you, just in case I married someone like you. It didn't protect your pittance of assets from me. It protected my trust fund from you. The clause about the spouse getting nothing in the event of infidelity or fraud? That applied to you, darling, not me." She pulled an envelope from her purse and tossed it onto the table in front of him. "Your clothes are packed in the garage. You have an hour to vacate the premises before I have you removed for trespassing. The keys to the Mercedes are gone. It's leased by the company, and the company is mine now. There's an Uber waiting for you at the gate." Derek looked at the envelope. It was the final divorce decree, ready for his signature. He had wanted to erase her. Instead, he had only succeeded in erasing himself. He looked up at her one last time. "Was any of it real, Lavinia? The 7 years? Did you ever love me?" Lavinia looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since that day in his office. Her eyes softened, just a fraction, with pity. "I loved the man I thought you could be, Derek, the man you pretended to be when we met. But that man never really existed, did he? He was just another one of your fraudulent projections." She turned her back on him and walked toward the sliding glass doors of the living room. "Goodbye, Derek. Try not to steal the towels on your way out." The ride from the Hamptons to the city was the longest of Derek's life. He didn't take an Uber. He couldn't get the app to work because his credit card had been declined. He had to beg the driver of a landscaping truck, a man he had yelled at just last week for trimming the hedges too loudly, to drop him off at the nearest train station. The humiliation burned hotter than the shame. When he finally arrived in Manhattan, it was raining again. The city that used to look like a playground now looked like a fortress he was locked out of. He went to the only place he had left, a small, grim studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen that he had rented under a shell company name years ago to store overflow files. It had a futon, a leaking faucet, and a view of a brick wall. For 3 weeks, Derek sat in that room, watching his empire dismantle itself on cable news. "Hawthorne Dynamics enters receivership," the headlines blared. "CEO indicted on 14 counts of fraud." He tried to call people. He called Blake, his fraternity brother who ran a hedge fund. Blocked. He called Senator Corcoran, whose campaign he had donated heavily to. The number was disconnected. He even tried calling Sophie, just to hear a voice. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." The automated voice mocked him. His only visitor was a court-appointed public defender named Leonard Pinsky. Pinsky was a tired man with coffee stains on his tie and a cynicism that ran bone deep. He sat on Derek's futon, opening a file that looked depressingly thin. "Here's the reality, Mr. Hawthorne," Pinsky said, not bothering to look up. "The feds have the ledger. They have the testimony from your ex-wife. And as of this morning, they have a cooperating witness." Derek looked up, his eyes sunken and red-rimmed. "Who?" "Sophie Miller," Pinsky said. "She cut a deal, full immunity, in exchange for testifying that you masterminded the embezzlement scheme and coerced her into signing the fraudulent checks. She's painting you as a Svengali who manipulated a naive assistant." Derek let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Naive? She was the one who demanded the diamonds. She was the one who told me to cook the books for the Vanguard meeting." "Doesn't matter," Pinsky shrugged. "She got to the prosecutor first. In a conspiracy case, the first rat to the cheese gets the deal. You're the cheese, Derek." "I want to fight it," Derek said, gripping the edge of the futon. "I want a trial. I can charm a jury. I can explain." "You have no money for experts," Pinsky cut him off brutally. "You have no character witnesses. Your own parents aren't speaking to you because the bank just foreclosed on their Florida house to cover your bail bond. If you go to trial, you will lose, and Judge Hargrave will give you the maximum sentence just to make an example of you. 20 years. Derek felt the walls closing in. "What's the offer?" "Plead guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud, 5 years in federal prison. Restitution of $10 million, which you'll never pay, so you'll be on wage garnishment for the rest of your life." Derek stared at the water stain on the ceiling. 5 years. He would be nearly 45 when he got out. He would have nothing. No name, no money, no future. "I need to talk to Lavinia," Derek whispered. "She won't see you," Pinsky said, packing up his briefcase. "She's busy." "Busy doing what?" Pinsky paused at the door, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "You haven't seen the journal today. She just bought the assets of Hawthorne Dynamics out of bankruptcy. She's rebranding. It's over, Derek. Sign the plea." While Derek was rotting in a studio apartment the size of a walk-in closet, staring at water stains on a crumbling ceiling, Lavinia was stepping into the light she had shunned for a decade. The transition wasn't instantaneous, but it was inevitable. Like a dormant volcano waking up, the rumble had been there for years. Now, the lava was flowing. The boardroom of the Global Sovereign Bank was a space few people ever saw, and even fewer were invited into. It didn't appear on building directories in the lobby. It was located on the top floor of a slate-grey skyscraper that pierced the clouds above the financial district, wrapped in polarized glass that turned the chaos of Manhattan below into a silent, abstract painting. The air inside was rarefied, smelling of old money, leather, teak, and the faint, crisp scent of ozone. Lavinia sat at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table. She wasn't wearing the soft pastels Derek had preferred, nor the nondescript cardigans she had used to make herself invisible. She wore a tailored suit of midnight blue, the cut sharp enough to draw blood. Her hair, once loose and approachable, was pinned back in a style that was severe, elegant, and utterly commanding. To her right sat her grandfather, Sebastian Taylor. At 80 years old, Sebastian was a legend whispered about in hushed tones at Davos and the G7 summits. He was frail now, his skin like parchment paper, stretched over brittle bone, but his eyes were undimmed. They were the same hazel as Lavinia's, but where hers had recently learned to freeze, His had been glacial for 50 years. He watched her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, tapping a manicured finger against the table. "You played it close to the chest, Lavinia," Sebastian said, his voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "For 7 years we heard nothing. We thought you had gone soft. We thought you had truly defected. Marrying that peasant." He spat the word peasant not with anger, but with the distaste one might have for a cockroach found in a salad. Lavinia didn't flinch. She opened a leather folder in front of her, her movements precise. "I didn't go soft, grandfather. I went undercover." Sebastian raised a white eyebrow. "Undercover? As a housewife in the Upper East Side? It hardly sounds like espionage." "It was the most educational experience of my life," Lavinia countered, her voice steady. "I grew up in this tower, Sebastian. I knew how to move money, how to leverage debt, how to crush a competitor from a boardroom. But I didn't know how the desperate struggle. I didn't understand the hunger that drives a man like Derek Hawthorne. I wanted to see if a man could build something from nothing without corruption. I wanted to know if the American dream was still viable without the cheat codes we possess." "And your conclusion?" Sebastian asked, leaning forward slightly. "That character is the only currency that matters," Lavinia replied, meeting his gaze without blinking. "And Derek Hawthorne was bankrupt from the start. He had the ambition, but not the discipline. He had the vision, but not the ethics. The moment the pressure mounted, he didn't innovate. He stole. He didn't work harder. He cheated." She slid a thick proposal across the polished mahogany. It stopped perfectly in front of Sebastian. "This is the acquisition strategy for the assets of Hawthorne Dynamics," she said. Sebastian opened the file, his eyes scanning the numbers. "You've already acquired the IP out of bankruptcy court. A shrewd move. Pennies on the dollar." He paused, looking up. "But why? The company is a husk. The brand is toxic." "The brand is toxic," Lavinia agreed. "But the engine is pristine. The code for Project Ether is actually brilliant. Derek just didn't know how to deploy it. He was trying to sell it as a marketing tool to predict consumer trends. It's not a marketing tool. It's a predictive security protocol. It can identify financial hemorrhages before they happen. It can trace embezzled funds through shell companies in nanoseconds." "And how do you know this?" Sebastian asked. "Because I know the architect," Lavinia said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Intimately." Sebastian closed the file. He looked at his granddaughter, really seeing her for the first time in a decade. He saw the steel in her spine that hadn't been there when she was 22. He saw the scars of betrayal that had healed into armor. The marriage hadn't broken her, it had forged her. She had walked into the fire and come out carrying the flame. "And what is your end game, Lavinia?" Sebastian asked. "Do you want to run this new division? Play with your tech toy?" "I don't want to run a division," Lavinia said, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with absolute certainty. "I want the chair. You're retiring next year, Sebastian. The board is restless. The wolves are circling. They think the Taylor line is ending with a whimper. They need a leader who knows both the high towers and the gutter. I know where the cracks in the foundation are because I lived in them for 7 years. I know how the rats get in." The room went silent. The audacity of the request hung in the air. Sebastian looked at her for a long, agonizing minute. Then the corners of his mouth twitched upward. It was a rare, terrifying expression. "Very well," he said. "Welcome home, Lavinia." 6 months later, the Federal Correctional Facility in upstate New York was a bleak, grey expanse of concrete and razor wire, carved out of a landscape that was already turning brown with the approaching winter. It was a place designed to strip away humanity, to reduce men to numbers and routine. It was a far cry from the penthouses, the galas, and the sun-drenched beaches of the Hamptons. Derek Hawthorne sat in the visitation room, a sterile box that smelled of bleach and despair. He was wearing a jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, the fabric rough against his skin. He looked 10 years older than the man who had stood on the stage at the plaza. His hair was thinning, his skin was sallow from lack of sunlight, and the arrogant sparkle in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a twitchy, fearful nervousness. He hadn't had a visitor in 4 months. When the guard told him he had one, his heart had lurched. He assumed it was his public defender, Pinsky, coming to deliver more bad news, another lawsuit, another lien, another nail in the coffin of his former life. He walked to the partitioned booth and sat down. When he looked up through the scratched, bulletproof plexiglass, his breath hitched in his throat. Lavinia. She sat on the other side, looking transcendent. She was wearing a simple navy suit, impeccable in its cut, with a silk scarf tied loosely around her neck. She didn't look like a vengeful ex-wife. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a stranger, someone from a world he could no longer touch, a world he had been exiled from forever. He picked up the heavy black phone receiver. His hand shook uncontrollably. "Lavinia," he croaked. His voice was rusty from disuse. "Hello, Derek," she said. Her voice came through the receiver, clear and calm. It was devoid of the anger he had expected, devoid of the bitterness he deserved. It was the indifference that cut him deepest. It was the tone one uses for a distant acquaintance or a business transaction. "Why are you here?" he asked, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting a trap. "To gloat? To see the animal in the cage? To make sure I'm suffering enough?" "No," Lavinia said simply. "I don't derive pleasure from suffering, Derek. That was always your flaw, not mine." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. She held it up to the glass. "I came to give you this." Derek squinted, leaning forward. It was a receipt, a bank transfer confirmation. "What is that?" "It's a confirmation of sale," Lavinia said, "for the house in Boca Raton, your parents' house." Derek slumped against the partition, a fresh wave of nausea hitting him. You took that too? Pinsky said the bank foreclosed. You bought it?" "I bought it back from the bank," Lavinia corrected him, "before the foreclosure auction went public. I paid the arrears, the penalties, and the outstanding principal." She lowered the paper. "I put the deed back in your parents' names, Derek. It's held in a trust, so no one can touch it. Not the government, not your creditors, and certainly not you. They won't be homeless. They can retire in peace." Derek stared at her, his mouth agape. Tears welled in his eyes, hot, stinging tears of confusion and shame. He had destroyed his parents' financial security to save his own skin. He had lied to them, used them, and abandoned them to the wolves. And the woman he had scorned, the woman he had called a leech, had saved them. "Why?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why would you do that? After everything I did to you, I tried to leave you with nothing." "Because unlike you, Derek, I don't punish the innocent for the sins of the guilty," Lavinia said softly. "Your parents are good people. They were kind to me when I had no one else. They just made one mistake. They raised a weak son and loved him too much to see it." Derek bowed his head, the receiver pressed against his forehead. He sobbed, a harsh, racking sound that drew the attention of the guard in the corner. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Lavinia, God, I am so sorry." "I know," Lavinia said. She watched him cry with a detached sadness. But apologies don't rewrite the past, Derek. They just make the future a little more bearable. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. Wait, Derek said, panic rising in his chest. He wasn't ready for her to leave. She was the only tether he had left to reality. Lavinia, please, there's something I need to understand. Lavinia paused, her hand on her purse. What is it? Project Ether, Derek said, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The code. I found it on your old laptop 3 years ago. The core algorithm. It was genius. I thought you had just downloaded it from some open-source forum. I thought you were just storing it. Lavinia looked at him, her expression unreadable. I wrote it, Derek, she said. The silence that followed was heavier than the concrete walls around them. You wrote it? I wrote it in college, Lavinia said. I was finishing my master's in computational finance. It was my thesis. I left it on that laptop for you to find. I wanted to see if you would acknowledge it. I wanted to see if you would come to me and say, Lavinia, this is amazing. Let's build this together. I wanted to be your partner, Derek, in every sense. She sighed, a small puff of air. But you didn't ask. You just stole it. You renamed it, packaged it, and sold it as your own genius invention. That was the day I knew our marriage was over. That was 3 years ago. I've just been waiting for you to hang yourself with it ever since. Derek stared at her, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The irony was suffocating. He was in prison for fraud, committed to prop up a company based on her genius. He had spent years searching for a partner who could match his ambition, all while treating the very architect of his success as a domestic accessory. He had held a diamond in his hand and treated it like glass until it cut him. I didn't know, he whispered. You never asked, Lavinia said. You were so obsessed with your legacy, you never asked if I had one. She turned toward the door. Lavinia, Derek yelled, slamming his hand against the glass. The guard took a step forward. Lavinia, wait! Don't leave me here! She didn't look back. She walked out of the visitation room, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind her, with a finality that echoed in Derek's soul. Outside, the air was crisp and clean. Lavinia took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of pine and damp earth. A black town car was waiting at the curb. The driver, a large man with a stoic face, opened the rear door. Where to, Miss Taylor? Lavinia paused. She looked back at the prison walls one last time. She thought of the man inside, the man she had loved, the man she had destroyed, and the man she had finally outgrown. She turned her face toward the horizon, where the faint silhouette of the city skyline glittered like a promise. To the office, she said, sliding into the leather seat. We have work to do. As the car drove away, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, Lavinia Taylor finally allowed herself a small, private smile. She had lost 7 years, but she had regained herself. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid, and for the first time in a long time, the account of her life was firmly, irrevocably, in the black. And that is how Derek Hawthorne learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the person holding up the foundation of your world. He thought Lavinia was just a supporting character in the movie of his life. But he forgot that the director is the one who yells, "Cut!" Derek chased the illusion of power and lost everything real, while Lavinia proved that true power doesn't need to shout, it just needs to wait. It's a reminder to all of us. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because they might be the one holding it steady. And more importantly, never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the aces, What did you think of Lavinia's revenge? Did Derek deserve his fate, or was 5 years in prison too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.